My name is Rachel Torres. I am 33 years old, and I work as a housing counselor at a HUD certified nonprofit agency called New Path Housing Services, which means I spend my professional life sitting across from families who are facing housing instability and helping them understand their options, their rights, and the specific steps that exist between where they are and where they need to be. I've helped families facing eviction understand what proper notice looks like and what it doesn't. I have helped people who were told you have to leave understand the specific difference between someone's desire to remove them and the legal authority to do so. I have sat with parents who were terrified for their children and explained, in the patient specific language of someone who knows the material from years of practice, that the fear and the actual danger were not the same thing, and that the steps to reduce the actual danger were clear and available. I had done this work for 7 years when my mother stood in the living room of the house she owned and said to my 8-year-old daughter Zoe, with the specific deliberateness of someone who has prepared a statement, "You're homeless now, sweetheart. Your mother has run out of chances." I looked at my daughter's face. I looked at my mother's face. I smiled. I reached into the pocket of my coat where I had been keeping something for 3 weeks. I took out my phone. I made one call. Let me tell you what was in my coat pocket, because it is the thing the story turns on. 3 weeks before my mother's statement, I had signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in the Riverside neighborhood. 11 minutes from Zoe's school and 4 blocks from a park that had a playground, I had driven by twice on the way to viewings and that Zoe had been pointing at from the car window, both times without knowing why we were in that neighborhood. I had signed the lease in my lunch hour, with the specific focus of someone who has been preparing for a moment and has arrived at the moment, and I had put the key in my coat pocket because I had wanted it physically present on me for the 3 weeks between the signing and the day I was going to tell Zoe. The key is a standard apartment key, brass, Yale lock, nothing remarkable. I had not told anyone about the apartment. Not my mother, not the cousin I was close to, not the friends who knew parts of the story. I had been carrying the key for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment to tell Zoe about the new home the way I wanted to tell her. Somewhere pleasant, away from the current house, in the specific way you tell a child good news that is also change, which requires care and timing and the absence of competing information. My mother's statement provided the competing information before I was ready. I smiled because the statement landed exactly where I had designed it to land, which was on a woman who already had what she needed, and the woman already had the key in her coat pocket. I want to introduce Zoe more fully before I introduce my mother, because Zoe is the reason the story matters, and the reason the preparation was the specific kind of complete it needed to be. Zoe Torres is 8 years old, and she is, in the specific, precise way that certain children are, a person who takes facts seriously. She asks follow-up questions. She checks things. She has a habit when she receives information of looking at it from several angles before she accepts it, which at age 8 means she often says, "But why?" 3 times before the explanation is sufficiently complete. She is not a difficult child in the sense that difficulty implies resistance. She is a thorough one, which is a quality I have tried to nurture rather than redirect, because thoroughness in a child is the beginning of competence in an adult, and I want her to be competent. She reads more than any other child I have known at her age. She has made several charts about things she has been tracking. The park visits are one, but there is also a chart about how long it takes different things to dry after washing, and a chart about what time the birds start making noise in the morning, at various times of year, which is a chart she started herself without being asked and that she has maintained faithfully for 4 months. She is the specific kind of person who makes the world more legible through careful observation of it. She comes by this honestly. The divorce that produced the housing situation was not complicated in its practical terms. We had been together for 6 years. The compatibility had eroded in the second half of those 6 years, and the decision to end it was arrived at after more than a year of working on it, in every way that working on it was available to us, and it was the correct decision. What made it difficult was the specific combination of practicalities that divorce always produces. The apartment we had shared needed to be decided. The custody arrangement needed to be decided. The financial architecture of 2 lives, previously merged, needed to be separated. All of this was handled through mediation, calmly, in the way that two people who are being their best selves in a hard situation handle things. The custody arrangement gave Zoe her weekdays with me and alternate weekends with her father, who has been a present and involved parent through all of it in a way that I am grateful for. The housing was the piece that produced the condition I did not fully anticipate, which was the specific combination of needing a two-bedroom on a single income in a market where two bedrooms required more of a single income than I had at the time. I should tell you about the 18 months that preceded the statement because they are the context without which the statement and the key and the smile are not fully legible. The divorce from my ex-husband was finalized 22 months ago, which is the event from which the housing situation takes its shape. We had been in our own apartment together, and after the divorce, the logistics required that I find housing quickly for Zoe and me on a single income that was not designed to cover a two-bedroom in a market where two bedrooms had increased significantly. My mother, Gloria Torres, owned a three-bedroom house in the neighborhood where I had grown up, which she had purchased years earlier and which she had been renting at market rate until the previous tenant moved out the month before my divorce. She offered it to Zoe and me at a reduced rate, framed as a temporary arrangement to help us get back on our feet. I accepted because the arrangement made financial sense and because I understood the logic of family helping each other through difficult periods, and because the reduced rate would allow me to save money toward eventually having my own place again. I moved in with Zoe, and for the first several months the arrangement functioned as described: temporary, helpful, quietly generous. The year between the divorce and signing the lease was a year of specific, incremental work that I want to describe because it is the counterstory to my mother's narrative about what I was doing. During that period, which was struggling, making bad choices, wasting the stability she was providing, here is what I was actually doing. I was building the financial architecture for the next phase of my life, month by month, in the specific way that a person builds something when they have a plan and are executing it carefully. I was paying rent to my mother at the reduced rate and saving the difference between that and market rate into an emergency fund that, by month 18, contained enough to cover 6 months of market rate rent. I was paying down the one debt I had carried out of the marriage that had an interest rate that bothered me professionally. I was advancing at work in year 2. After the divorce, I moved from staff counselor to senior counselor, which came with a salary increase that changed the financial picture meaningfully. I was looking at apartments in the neighborhoods I had identified as viable. The right school district, the right commute, the right price point. Starting in month 15, not urgently, but steadily, the specific apartment search of a person who is not desperate and is therefore looking from a position of information rather than need. I found the Riverside apartment in month 17 at a viewing I had attended on a Tuesday afternoon. The building was modest and well maintained. The apartment was on the third floor with the east-facing window. The park was visible from the street outside. The monthly rent was within my now recalculated budget and left the specific margin I had determined was necessary for both security and quality of life. I walked the neighborhood after the viewing, around the park and past Zoe's school, calculating the route she would take, identifying the coffee shop I would go to on the way to work, noting the grocery store proximity. I was building the picture of the next life before I had the lease in hand, the way I had been building the financial architecture for it since month 1. I went back for a second viewing. I asked the questions I advise clients to ask. I reviewed the lease document with the professional attention I bring to all housing documents. I signed it 3 weeks before Thursday. The key went in my coat pocket. I kept going to work. I kept paying my mother's rent. I kept looking for the right moment to tell Zoe. My mother sent a text saying she was coming Thursday. Thursday arrived. Then the conditions started appearing. I use this word deliberately because the conditions did not arrive in a single conversation as explicit terms. They arrived incrementally over the following year in the specific way that conditions appear when someone is using a resource as leverage without ever quite saying so. A comment about my ex-husband that led into a suggestion that perhaps I had given up too quickly, followed by a mention of what the house would cost me at market rate, followed by a question about whether I had considered the effect of the divorce on Zoe, followed by a more direct statement about what she thought I should do. My mother had not approved of the divorce. She had not said this at the time because there was nothing to be said at the time. The divorce was finalized and done. But the disapproval had not dissipated. It had gone into the infrastructure of her help. where it sat and accumulated. She believed Zoe needed her father in the home. She believed I had made a choice that had harmed my daughter. She believed the reduced rent was purchasing, at minimum, my openness to hearing her views on this subject. I was not open to reviews on this subject, which I had communicated directly and which had not resolved the issue because my mother is a person for whom direct communication of a closed position is an invitation to find a different approach, rather than a signal to stop. The texts began arriving in earnest around month 12 of the arrangement. Not hostile texts, nothing that read in isolation as coercive, but texts that, when read together in the full thread, told a clear story. I have kept them all because I am a housing counselor and I know that documentation is the difference between a claim and a case. One text from month 12. I'm just thinking about the future. I care about you and Zoe. I want you to be stable. The house helps with that, and I want to keep helping. One from month 14. I worry that the direction things are going is making it harder for me to feel good about the arrangement. I hope we can talk. One from month 15. After a conversation I declined to have, I said you could use my house to get back on your feet. I didn't agree to support choices I fundamentally disagree with. I need you to understand that. One from month 16. If things continue, way they have been, we are going to need to revisit the arrangement. And 3 days before, the day with the statement, I'm coming over Thursday, we need to resolve this. I want to be precise about what I was being asked to resolve because the request was not abstract. My mother had been told, through a family connection, that I had gone on a dinner date with someone. Not a significant relationship, a first date, a person I had been introduced to by a colleague, a perfectly ordinary occurrence in the life of a divorced person. My mother's view was that the date was evidence that I had permanently abandoned any intention of reconciling with my ex-husband, and that this was a harm she was not willing to continue to facilitate by providing subsidized housing. The house, in her framework, had been offered to provide stability while I went through a temporary difficulty in her framework. Choosing to date was evidence that I had decided the difficulty was permanent and had moved on from the marriage, in her framework. Her continued subsidization of this decision was not something she was obligated to provide. Her framework was wrong in every important sense. It fundamentally misunderstood what her help had been, what reconciliation would have required, and what her role in my housing was, but the framework was consistent and she had been acting within it for 18 months. My work at New Path Housing Services is a thing I want to describe in more detail because the work is not separate from the story. It is the context that made the specific outcome possible. I've been a housing counselor for 7 years, which is long enough to have developed the specific knowledge that comes from doing the same kinds of work with many different families. Knowledge of the patterns. Knowledge of what people in housing instability do that makes it worse. Knowledge of what they do that makes it better. Knowledge of the specific legal and practical landscape in our state and county that either protects people or fails to. The work is organized around the simple premise that people in housing instability have more options than they think they have, and that the counselor's job is to help them see and access those options clearly. I have helped families who are told you have to leave immediately, understand the specific notice requirements in our state, and the specific legal remedies available if those requirements are not met. I've helped families who believed they had no options find options they had not known existed. I do this every week. I did not need to do it for myself on Thursday because I had already done it 3 weeks earlier. But the professional knowledge was the foundation for everything that happened. There is something specific about being a housing counselor that I want to name, which is the relationship between knowing and acting. Many of the people I work with know, in a general sense, that they have rights. They know that eviction requires process. They know that landlords cannot simply demand immediate departure. They know that there are legal protections. What they often do not know is the specifics. What notice looks like, what clock it starts, what resources are available, what the filing fees are, what the timeline is, and the gap between general knowledge and specific knowledge is where families lose housing they might have kept. My job is to close that gap specifically and quickly so that the general knowledge becomes the specific knowledge and the specific knowledge becomes action. I had closed that gap for myself long before Thursday in the specific form of knowing my tenant rights in our state 30-day written notice minimum, knowing my rights as an informal tenant, they apply regardless of whether there is a written lease, and knowing that the documentation I had accumulated over 18 months would support any legal process that became necessary. I did not need the legal process because I was M. Oving Saturday, but I would have known exactly how to use it if I had needed it. I had known for approximately 6 weeks before Thursday that the arrangement was coming to an end, not because she had said so explicitly. Her Thursday text was the most explicit she had been, but because I could read the trajectory and I had professional training in reading housing trajectories. I am a housing counselor, and I help people understand when housing is at risk before the risk becomes a crisis. I have been reading my own situation with the same lens I apply to client situations, which had produced a very specific assessment. The informal tenancy was at risk. The timeline was not certain, but was likely within weeks. The appropriate response was to secure alternative housing before the crisis rather than after it. I had looked at the new apartment 3 weeks before Thursday. I had signed the lease 3 weeks before Thursday. I had been carrying the key for 3 weeks. I was not homeless on Thursday. I had been ready for Thursday for 3 weeks. I should describe my mother in the fuller version because the accurate account of this situation requires her to be more than the person who said, "You're homeless now." Gloria Torres is 62 years old, and she has been, in the years I have known her, that are all the years of my life, the specific kind of parent who loves her children in the total, consuming way that makes the love both the best thing about her and the source of most of the difficulty. The love is real. The love does not have clean edges. It has been organized, for as long as I can remember, around the specific beliefs my mother has about what a good life for her daughter looks like. And the beliefs and the love have been so intertwined that when she has helped me, the help has often carried the weight of the belief in it. And when the circumstances of my life have diverged from the belief, the relationship has created friction. The divorce diverged from the belief about what a good life for a daughter looked like, and the friction it created was the friction that produced Thursday. She is not cruel, my mother. I want to be clear about this because the statement she made to Zoe sounds like cruelty, and in that moment it was cruelty, but it was not her characteristic mode. Her characteristic mode is loving and controlling in the more specific fusion that produces both of those things simultaneously, which is the mode of a person who has not fully distinguished between her love for you and her preferences about your life. The statement on Thursday was the version of her that emerges when the loving and controlling modes are under stress, when the control has not produced the compliance and the frustration has nowhere to go except into the moment and the words of the moment. She said, "You're homeless now," to a child because she was a person who was out of other moves and had decided that the child was the lever she had not yet tried. It was wrong. It was also explicable, which is different from forgivable but closer to it than inexplicable would have been. On Thursday, my mother arrived at 10 in the morning, which was earlier than I had expected. Zoe was home. It was a professional development day at school, and she was at the kitchen table with a book she had been reading since breakfast, the kind of sustained early morning reading that is one of Zoe's specific qualities and that I have never tried to interrupt because the quality is too good to interfere with. My mother came in. I had given her a key 18 months earlier, a decision I had reversed 2 weeks before Thursday by changing the locks, a decision I had not announced, which my mother apparently had not noticed because she used the new key. I had left for her, and she went straight to the living room, and she said, loud enough for Zoe to hear from the kitchen, "Zoe, sweetheart, come here." Zoe came. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen. My mother said, in the specific tone of someone delivering a conclusion rather than a threat, the tone of accomplished fact rather than warning, "You're homeless now, sweetheart. Your mother has run out of chances." Zoe looked at me. My mother looked at me. I want to describe what I felt in the 2 seconds between the statement and the smile, because the 2 seconds mattered. I felt the specific quality of a person who has done the correct preparation and is watching the situation confirm the preparation. The preparation was the lease and the key and the moving company booked for Saturday, and the talk I had planned to have with Zoe about the new apartment on Friday afternoon at the park across the street from our new building. The preparation was complete. The statement landed on a complete preparation and produced a specific feeling of a professional who has anticipated the crisis and has already resolved it, which is a different feeling from relief. and a different feeling from triumph. It is the feeling of, this is exactly what I was ready for. I smiled at my mother. I reached into my coat pocket. I took out my phone. I found the number. I called. The person on the other end answered, and I said, "Hi, this is Rachel Torres. I wanted to confirm our move date for Saturday, the 24th. Yes, 9 a.m. Perfect. Thank you." I ended the call. I put the phone back in my pocket. I reached into my coat pocket again and took out the key. I held it out to Zoe. I said, "This is the key to our new apartment, Zoe. We move Saturday. There's a park across the street with a playground." Zoe took the key. She looked at it. She looked at me. She said, "We have an apartment." I said, "Yes." She said, "How long have you had it?" I said, 3 weeks. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said I wanted to tell her somewhere special, but that this was an okay time to tell her. She turned the key over in her hands. She said, "Is it better than here?" I said I thought she would like it. She looked at me with the specific expression she has when she is running the calculation of a situation, the particular attention of a person who takes facts seriously, and she said, "Is that why you're not scared?" I said yes. She said, "Okay." She put the key in the pocket of her jeans and went back to her book. My mother was still standing in the living room. I had not looked directly at her since Zoe went back to the kitchen. I looked at her now. In the flat, even way I look at difficult situations in client meetings, the professional attention of someone who has received the situation and is going to address it clearly. I said, "Gloria, I appreciate that you offered us the house. It helped Zoe and me through a difficult period. We're moving Saturday." She said, "You already have a place?" I said, "I signed the lease 3 weeks ago." She said, "How long have you known you were leaving?" I said, "I've been planning to leave since I had the financial stability to leave, which took about a year." She said, You weren't going to tell me." I said I was going to give notice. "I have your number." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I was trying to help you." I said, "You did help me, and then you decided the help had conditions that I hadn't agreed to, and when I didn't meet the conditions, you tried to remove our housing." "I want to be clear about that distinction," she said. "I never said the house was forever. I said, you're right. And I didn't treat it as forever. I treated it as a temporary situation, and I planned for the transition." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I told Zoe she was homeless." I said, "Zoe has a key in her pocket. She's going to be fine." Here is what my 7 years of housing counseling had given me that was specifically relevant to Thursday morning, and I want to name it precisely because it is the hidden machinery of the whole story. As a housing counselor at a HUD-certified agency, I help families understand two categories of FIN. GS, their legal rights as tenants, and the specific practical steps that move them from housing instability to housing stability. These two categories look like different jobs and are in fact the same job. Because legal rights without practical knowledge of how to exercise them are not useful, and practical steps without the legal foundation are not secure. I had both categories. The legal category told me that even as an informal tenant, someone with no written lease, paying a reduced rate to a family member, I had tenant protections in our state that required proper written notice before any move out was required, and that proper written notice started a clock of at minimum 30 days. My mother could not have legally required us to leave Thursday. She could not have legally required us to leave Saturday. If she had attempted to force us out without proper notice, the steps available to me were clear, and I could have taken them in my sleep. The practical category told me that the moment to secure new housing was before the crisis, not during it, which I had done 3 weeks earlier, and that the specific combination of a secured new tenancy and the documented texts about the conditional nature of the current arrangement was sufficient basis for any legal process that might have become necessary, which it did not because I was moving Saturday. I had not shared any of this with my mother because there was no strategic reason to share it. The information was mine. It was in my professional knowledge and my documented files and my coat pocket and my confirmed moving date. My mother had assumed, because families often assume this, that the person in the dependent position in a housing arrangement was therefore the person without options. She had not accounted for the specific professional competence of the person she was dealing with, which is the predictable gap in the assessment of people who have known you since before your competence was developed. My mother knew me at 3, and at 15 and at the worst period of my adult life. And she had not fully updated her picture of who I had become in the years since. The person she had offered the house to was in a difficult stretch and needed help. The person standing in the living room on Thursday had been a housing counselor for 7 years, knew her tenant rights better than most housing attorneys, and had signed a lease 3 weeks earlier. The gap between those two pictures was the gap in her assessment, and the gap was the reason she had expected devastation and received a phone call confirmation. The 3 weeks between signing the lease and Thursday were weeks I managed with the specific discipline of a person who has a complete plan and is waiting for the plan to execute on its timeline. I went to work. I helped a family understand their rights in a Section 8 dispute that had been ongoing for 8 weeks, and that was resolved in 2 days once I had helped them understand which housing authority office to contact with which documentation. I helped an elderly man, facing eviction from a unit he had lived in for 30 years, understand what the eviction process actually required and how to respond to the notice correctly, which bought him 4 months and eventually a settlement that kept him in the unit. I came home to my mother's house every evening and made dinner and helped Zoe with homework and read to her and did the ordinary work of a parent. And I did it in the knowledge that the key was in my coat pocket and the lease was in my files, and the moving company was booked for Saturday, and Saturday was 3 weeks away, then 2 weeks away, then 1 week away. I was not counting down to Saturday. I was living in the ordinary days that the plan was making possible, the ordinary days that the preparation had purchased. I did not tell anyone about the lease, which required a specific kind of containment that is not my default mode. I am not a secretive person. I am a purse. Anu talks to the people I trust about the things that matter. I had not told my cousin Marisol, who had been my closest support through the 18 months, because I had learned that information about my plans sometimes found its way to my mother through the specific permeability of family networks, and I did not want my mother to know about the apartment before I had the key in Zoe's hands. I had not told anyone at work because the professional and personal dimensions of the situation had always been easier to manage when I kept them in separate compartments. I had told Zoe nothing because the telling needed to happen on my terms and in my timing, and the timing I had chosen was Friday afternoon at the park across the street from our new building before the Saturday move, where she could see the place and the park together. Thursday arrived before Friday. The plan adjusted to Thursday. The moving company was 2 men and a truck, which I had booked 4 weeks earlier. The booking confirmation was in my email. Saturday arrived on schedule. I had told Zoe about the new apartment the previous evening, sitting on the edge of her bed with the key in my hand, in the careful, specific way that I had been planning the park across the street, the window that faced east, the specific details that would make the place feel real to her. Before she saw it, she had asked good questions. The school was still the same. Yes, her friends could still visit. Yes, there was room for her bookshelf. Yes, she had gone to sleep holding the key. Saturday morning, she carried it in her pocket to the new apartment, where she walked straight to the east-facing window and stood in the morning light and said, "This is ours." I said yes. She put the key in the dish I had designated for keys in the kitchen, with the specific deliberateness of someone who understands that a key in a dish means you live somewhere. I had texted my mother Friday evening to let her know the move was on schedule and to confirm that the house would be available for her as of Saturday. She texted back, "Okay." She texted again, 15 minutes later. "I am sorry for what I said to Zoe." I held the phone for a moment. Then I texted back, "I know. We're going to be okay." She said, "I know you are." That was the full exchange. And it was more than I had expected and less than everything that needed to be said. And I filed it in the category of things that are the beginning of a longer conversation and not the conversation itself. The longer conversation happened in January, 6 weeks after the move. I asked my mother to have lunch. She came to the neighborhood with the park, and we sat at the kitchen table in the new apartment. And the lunch had the specific quality of conversations that have been preceded by something honest, and that therefore have a different foundation than the previous conversations I had laid out over lunch. What I needed her to understand about Thursday, not as an accusation, but as the information that would allow us to have a relationship that was not built on the power she thought she had over me. I said, "You told Zoe she was homeless?" "She was not homeless." You believe the housing you provided me was leverage over my choices. And I need you to understand that I do not have housing relationships with people who use housing as leverage. I did not when you offered the house, and I should have been clearer about that earlier. I am being clear about it now, she said. I thought I was helping you. I said, you were helping me, and then you decided the help had a cost I hadn't agreed to. Those are two different things. She said I was trying to do what was best for Zoe. I said, I believe you believed that. What was best for Zoe was what I was doing, which was planning our next home carefully, so that when the current arrangement ended, she had a key in her pocket instead of a crisis. She said, how did you know it was going to end? I said, Gloria, am a housing counselor. I read housing situations. I read ours. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I didn't think about that. I said, I know. After my mother left on Thursday morning, she had stayed 20 minutes. The conversation had been the conversation I described, and she had left with the specific quality of someone whose expectations had not been met and who was processing. The gap between expectation and result. I sat down at the kitchen table with Zoe, who had come back from her book and was sitting across from me with the key in her hand and the expression she wears when she is working through something carefully. She said, why did Grandma say we were homeless? I said, because she thought we were, and she was wrong. She said, why did she think we were? I said, she owns this house and she thought that meant she could decide when we had to leave. And she can decide that she's the owner. But we were already planning to leave, so her decision didn't change anything. Zoe thought about this. She said she didn't know about the apartment. I said no. She said, why didn't you tell her? I said, because it was our plan, and I wanted to make it on our terms. She looked at the key. She said, is Grandma bad? I said, Grandma loves us. She made a bad decision today. Those aren't the same thing. Zoe considered this with the thoroughness she applies to facts that require processing. She said, does she know she made a bad decision? I said, she will. Zoe put the key back in her pocket. She went back to her book. I sat at the table for another few minutes, thinking about the park and the east-facing window and Saturday, and then I went to start packing the kitchen. The packing took 2 days, which was efficient, because I had been preparing for it for 3 weeks. I had been quietly boxing non-essential items in the evenings while Zoe was at her father's for the alternate weekend, and by Thursday the apartment was 3/4 ready to move. The kitchen was the last significant work. I boxed the dishes and the pots and the pantry in a single, focused afternoon. And I left out only what we needed for 2 more dinners. And by Friday evening, we were ready. The moving company arrived Saturday at 9, as confirmed. Zoe carried the key to the new apartment in her pocket for the Feck's entire move. When we arrived, she was the one who opened the door. What changed? My mother and I have been having a different kind of conversation since January. Not dramatically different. She is still herself. She still has strong opinions about my choices. She still believes things about the divorce that I do not believe, but different in the specific way that things are different. When a power structure has been removed and the relationship has to function without it, she had believed for 18 months that the housing gave her a position from which to influence my decisions. The housing is gone, and the influence it provided is gone. And what's left is the relationship itself, which has to work on its own terms. The terms, it turns out, are more honest than the previous arrangement, because they do not include the specific distortion that is produced when one person has something the other person needs. I do not need her housing. I have housing. We are having lunch. The January lunch, which I described briefly, deserves more than I gave it because it contained a conversation that I think about when I think about what the full resolution of the situation looks like. We sat in the kitchen of the new apartment, and my mother said, over the pasta I had made, that she had been thinking about what had happened since November and that she had been talking to someone, a therapist. She said, which surprised me in the best way, because my mother is not generally a person who seeks professional help voluntarily, and that the therapist had helped her understand that the help she had provided had been designed to maintain a connection, as she was afraid of losing. She said, I was afraid you were going to have a life that didn't include me. And the house was, it was my way of making sure you were in my orbit. And when you started making choices that meant you were building a life that didn't look like the one I had imagined for you, I panicked. I said, the life I was building includes you. She said, I know that now. She said, I didn't know it then. I thought the divorce was the beginning of you leaving. I said, it was the beginning of me building something that was mine. That's different. She said, I'm still learning the difference. I said, I thought that was okay. We had the pasta, she helped me wash up. She admired the east-facing window, which was letting in the specific midwinter light that comes in that direction in January and that I had been noticing every morning since we moved. She said it was beautiful. I said, I knew. Zoe has settled into the new apartment with the specific completeness of a child who has been properly prepared for a transition and who has found the new place to be what was described. The park is across the street and she has been to the playground 15 times since the move, which she has been tracking in the specific Zoe way she made a chart. The key is in the dish, in the kitchen. Her bookshelf is in her room. Her window faces east and she has been waking up with the morning light in a way she tells me she likes. I watch her in the apartment with the satisfaction of someone who planned something carefully and had it work correctly. And the satisfaction is professional as much as personal. I know what it takes to move a family from housing instability to housing stability, and I know the steps, and I did the steps, and the steps produce the outcome. The steps are designed to produce. My work at New Path Housing Services in the months after the move has had a specific quality that is different from the work before it. I am doing the same cases: families and housing instability, tenant rights, eviction prevention, resource navigation, but I am doing them with the specific grounded quality of someone who has recently been on the other side of the desk and who therefore understands the client experience from the inside in a way that the professional knowledge alone does not produce. I have always been a careful counselor. I am a more empathetic one now, in the specific sense that empathy means understanding from the inside, rather than from the training. I know what it feels like to sit across from someone who has something you need. I know what it feels like to do the professional calculation while managing the emotional weight of it. I know what it feels like to carry the key in your pocket while everything around you is uncertain, as the evidence of your own preparation. I have started including, in the first session, with families who are in housing arrangements with relatives, the children living in parents' properties, the parents living in children's properties, the sibling sharing arrangements that have been in place longer than they were designed to be, and a specific conversation about the documentation of the arrangement's terms. I ask, is there a written agreement? What does it say about notice? What has been said about the conditions under which the arrangement continues? I ask these questions because the answers tell you where the risk is, and the risk that is identified early can be planned around, and the planning is the thing that makes the crisis survivable. I also tell these clients, if you believe the arrangement is at risk, the time to secure alternative housing is before the risk becomes a crisis. I have always said this. I say it now with the specific authority of someone who did it, and it worked. I should add something about the smoking gun, because this story has one and it belongs in the record. The text I had saved, the thread of conditional language, from months 12 through 16. The explicit I said you could use my house to support choices I disagree with. I had kept all of them in the specific way I keep documentation in my professional work, because I had known from month 12 that the documentation might matter. It did not matter, ultimately, because we moved Saturday and there was no legal action required, but the documentation existed, and it contained the complete picture of the arrangement's real terms. And if my mother had attempted to force us out before Saturday, the documentation would have been in a filing with the housing court within 24 hours. She did not attempt to force us out. She said, "You're homeless now," and I made a phone call, and her daughter moved on her own timeline, on her own terms, to her own home. The documentation is in my files. I keep it because it is accurate and because accuracy is the habit that makes the work possible. There is a specific thing I want to say about the smile, because it has come up in the times I have told this story to people I trust, and the question they ask is, was it a performance? Was the smile an act? A choice to perform composure for a specific effect? The answer is no, and the reason the answer is no is worth explaining. The smile was the specific involuntary response to the alignment between a situation and its preparation. When you have prepared for something and the thing arrives exactly as prepared for, there is a specific experience that is neither relief nor triumph, but something more quiet. The experience of having been correct, having acted on the correctness, and now watching the correctness prove itself. It is the experience of the professional who sees the case they have prepared and knows they are ready for it. I've had it before. In client situations where the preparation was complete and the hearing arrived and everything went correctly. I had it on Thursday morning in my mother's house. The smile was not designed to communicate anything. It was the expression my face made in response to the experience of being ready. The smile was documentation. It said, I saw this coming. I prepared for it. And here we are. The key is still in the dish. We have lived here 4 months and the key is in the same dish where Zoe placed it on moving day. I look at it sometimes in the mornings. Not from sentiment, exactly, but from the specific recognition of a person who carries her work with her and who looks at objects the way her work has taught her to look at them. The key is documentation. This is where we live. This is who we are. This is the home that was prepared before it was needed. The preparation is the thing I am most proud of. Not because it was clever, but because it was the specific application of professional knowledge to a personal situation. The conversion of 7 years of housing counseling into the 30s it took to sign a lease, 3 weeks before Thursday, I had been telling families for 7 years. The time to secure alternative housing is before the crisis. I had secured alternative housing before the crisis. The crisis arrived and found us ready, and being ready produced the smile, and the smile produced the one phone call. And the phone call confirmed what was already true. That is the order of things. When the preparation is complete, the crisis comes last. My cousin Marisol called me the week after the move, when the boxes were still in the hallway and Zoe's bookshelf was in the process of being assembled, and asked me how the move had gone. I told her the full story. The lease signed 3 weeks. Earlier, the Thursday confrontation, the key, the phone call. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How long did you know it was going to happen? I said, 6 weeks maybe? In the sense of knowing in the professional way, longer in the sense of watching the direction. She said, Why didn't you tell anyone? I said, I had not wanted the information to get back to my mother. She said, I would not have told your mother. I said, I know. I just needed it to be contained. She said, So you did this all by yourself? I said, I did it the way I would do it for a client, one step at a time, with the documentation, and the plan executed in sequence. She said, Your clients are lucky to have you. I said, They are. We laughed. She came over that Saturday and helped me put together Zoe's bookshelf, which had 16 screws and an instruction manual that Zoe read in full before handing it to Marisol. Marisol and Zoe assembled the bookshelf. I brought sandwiches. We arranged the books. The books are on the shelf now, in the room with the east-facing window. Zoe has been reading her way through a series about a girl who travels through time to solve historical mysteries, which she tells me about in a specific, comprehensive way. She has of summarizing plots, not leaving anything out, in order, with the analytical commentary about what the protagonist should have done differently. I listen to these summaries with the specific pleasure of a parent listening to a child who is fully alive in what she is reading, and I file the specific details of each summary in the place where I keep the things that are just Zoe being Zoe, the catalog of the particular person I am raising. She is 8. She is thorough. She carries facts in her pocket the way she carries keys. She opened our front door on moving day with the key and she said this is ours and she has not needed to check since, which is a specific proof that the preparation produced the thing the preparation was designed to produce. A child who knows where she lives and knows that it is hers and does not need to wonder. I think sometimes in the evenings in the new apartment about what my mother was trying to do when she made the statement. I do not think she was trying to harm Zoe. I think she believed in the way that people believe things when fear and love have become inextricable. That the statement would produce the outcome she wanted, which was some version of me reconsidering, being frightened enough to comply with something, being reminded of what she could take away. She did not understand that taking it away was the plan. She thought she was delivering a crisis, and she was delivering a confirmation. She said, You're homeless now to a child who had a key in a woman's coat pocket. And the key was the answer to the crisis before the crisis arrived, and the crisis arrived and found the answer already in the pocket. And the whole sequence took 30 seconds and one phone call. That is what preparation looks like when it is done correctly. The crisis comes last and finds you ready. You smile because you are ready and because being ready is the thing you were building toward, and the building is done. Yolanda asked me, the Monday after the move, how the weekend had been. I said it had been eventful. She said she could see something had shifted. I said yes. She asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said not at work. She said, but it worked out. I said yes. She said it usually does when the preparation is complete. I said, you told me that in month 15. About a case we were reviewing. She said, I thought maybe you were listening for yourself. I said, you were right. She said, I usually am. She went back to her desk. I went to mine. We had clients to call. I have been thinking about what to say to Zoe when she is old enough to want the fuller version of the story. She is 8 now, and the version she has is sufficient for 8. We have a home. We got it ourselves. Grandma is someone we see on her good days. But someday she will want to know what happened on Thursday, and why the key was already in my pocket, and what the smile meant. And I have been organizing those answers in my head to the perfect way I organize case notes, in the sequence that tells the story completely. The sequence goes: Grandma was scared of losing us, and the fear made her try to control things she did not have the right to control. And I had learned through 7 years of professional work that the response to housing instability is not fear or compliance, but documentation and preparation. And I'd applied the professional response to my own situation, and the preparation was complete. On Thursday morning, when the crisis arrived, the sequence ends with, the key was already in my pocket, and it was already ours. That is the version I will tell her. I do not know when she will ask for it. She may ask sooner than I expect, because she is thorough, and she keeps facts, and she has not forgotten Thursday, even if she has not pressed me about it. She knows the key is in the dish, and she knows she was the one who opened the front door on moving day, and she knows she said this is ours. The rest she will ask for when she is ready for it. I will give it to her correctly in order, with nothing left out. I have been practicing the telling in my head since November. When she asks, I will be ready. That is also what preparation is. Having the right answer ready before the question arrives. I have been ready for a long time. The keys are in the dish. The books are on the shelf. The east-facing window brings in the morning. We are home. The documentation I assembled during the 18 months, the text thread, the notes I made, the saved voicemails from 2 conversations that I'd recorded on my phone after consulting with a legal colleague, confirmed I had the right to record in our state, is in a folder on my computer. I labeled it the way I label case files, which is by date and a brief, descriptive phrase, and the folder sits in my professional files rather than my personal ones because that is where it belongs. It is a case file. It was a case I was managing for a client who happened to be me. The client is now in a stable housing situation with a 12-month lease and no conditional arrangements with family members, and a key and a dish by the front door. The file is closed. The record is complete. The case notes say, client secured alternative housing prior to housing instability event. Client's child was not harmed. Client is stable. The work that needed to be done was done in the correct sequence. The outcome was what the preparation was designed to produce. This is the work. This is what it looks like when the work is done correctly, not in the professional context and not in the client context, but in the personal one. You know what your rights are. You do the preparation, the knowledge makes possible. You let the preparation be complete before the crisis arrives. And when the crisis arrives, you smile, and you make the one call, and you hold out the key. The crisis is not the thing. The preparation is the thing. The preparation was mine. The key was mine. The home was ours. I had known it was going to be ours for 3 weeks. The crisis came last, as crises do when the preparation is complete, and found us ready. And the smile was the proof. The Thursday conversation with my mother had one moment I haven't fully described, which is the minute after I made the phone call and held out the key. My mother was still standing in the living room. She had not moved since the phone call ended. I had handed the key to Zoe, and Zoe had said, "We have an apartment." And I had said yes, and Zoe had said, "How long have you had it?" And I had said 3 weeks, and Zoe had said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I had explained, and Zoe had gone back to her book, and then it was just me and my mother in the living room, and the things she had come to deliver had been received in a way she had not designed for. She said, "Finally, you've been planning to leave." I said, I've been planning to be independent. Leaving is part of that, she said. Since when? I said, since the beginning. I've always been planning to be independent. You offered a bridge and I used it and I am grateful for it and I used it to get to the next stable place, which is what a bridge is for, she said. I thought you might stay. I said, I know you did. There was a long pause. She said, I said something terrible to Zoe. I said, you did. She said, I need to fix that. I said yes. She walked to the kitchen doorway and she said to Zoe, who looked up from her book, with the patient attention of a child who has been listening to adults the whole time. Zoe, I'm sorry for what I said. You have a home. Your mom is very good at taking care of you. Zoe looked at her for a moment. She said, I know. She went back to her book. My mother looked at me. I said, thank you. She nodded once. She left. That exchange, the one I had been too focused on the key and the call to include initially, is the one I return to most. Not for my mother's departure or for my calm, but for Zoe's I know. An 8-year-old who said I know. In the flat. Complete way of someone who has not doubted it, who received the apology not as relief, but as confirmation of what she had never actually stopped believing. The preparation was not just the lease, and the key, and the moving company. The preparation was the 18 months of Zoe watching me plan and save and research and be specific and steady in a situation that could have been chaos. She had watched me do the work. She knew. When my mother said, "You're homeless now," that the statement was wrong, not because I had told her it was wrong, but because she had been watching someone who does not get caught without a plan. She was 8. She knew. I had shown her, in the 18 months, that the work was the protection. She had been watching the work. The work had prepared her as much as it had prepared me. That is what it means to do the work in front of your children. They learn what the work produces, which is not rescue but readiness, which is better than rescue, which is the thing that makes rescue unnecessary. The key was in my pocket. She put it in the dish. We are home. We have been ready all along. The birds make noise at a specific time. Zoe has been tracking it since we moved in. I know this because the chart is on the refrigerator, dated and initialed in her careful handwriting. The specific record of a person who has found her home and is paying attention to it. The chart is documentation. It says, we are here, we are noticing, we are staying. I look at it every morning. It is the best thing on the refrigerator. It is the only chart I have ever seen that is also a declaration. We live here, we know where we are home. I am a housing counselor. I told a family in crisis last week what I have been telling families for 7 years. The time to secure alternative housing is before the crisis. The family looked at me the way families look when they understand the information but not the urgency of it. I said, the preparation is what makes the smile possible. They looked at me. I said, trust me, I have done this. The smile was real.